Good evening, it's Tennyson Stead, the writer and director of Quantum Theory, one of the founding members of 8-Sided Films, here with another video blog, and tonight we're going to be talking about the use and concern of tone in cinema. And the reason I'm bringing it up is for two separate reasons. First of all, anybody who's paying attention to our satirical do-it-yourself advice blog by director David Allen Rifkin noticed that just last week we actually brought up the issue of tone and painted a picture of how Hollywood tends to approach tone in cinema. And the other reason is because we've reached a saturation point as an industry where if you're working in the business and you're reading reviews and you're reading the trades and information about film on a daily basis, you can't go more than a few hours without reading an article about the excellent use of tone in this film or the poor use of tone in that film or how important tone is to film and its creative success. And the reason why it's a hot button issue for me is because tone is actually a red herring problem. Tone is one of those things that the film industry has learned from film critics and actually has nothing to do, when you get right down to it, with how movies are made. It's an observation you can make about movies, but it's a byproduct of some very important things in the production process and development process, as opposed to something that you need to focus on. Tone is one of those issues that really truly sorts itself out. And when we pay too much attention to critics who identify it as something that's important and valuable, we're taking the easy way out of a much deeper problem. So, what is that deeper problem and where does tone come from? One of the things I've discussed in the developmental breakdown very consistently is how cinema comes from action. An actor is called an actor because they take action. And the core of any narrative, either on stage or in film, any narrative that involves actors whatsoever, is the narrative action, or in other words, the mission that character has been given. Okay? And we call it a mission because there's a couple things that action needs to have. Number one, it needs to be extremely challenging to the character. It needs to be something the character probably won't succeed at. Okay? The other thing is it has to be very important to that character. And every single character in the movie needs their own job to do, their own mission. In other words, to use Star Wars as an example, Luke Skywalker begins the story the moment he decides he needs to liberate himself and the rest of the galaxy. That's his mission, is to create freedom for everyone. And Darth Vader's mission is to enslave everyone. The conflict of the story comes from the fact that those two missions cannot coexist. Only one of those two characters is going to get what they want. And the fact that they're both pursuing those goals means that they're going to have to deal with each other at some point. And on every single level, that's what scene work is. The other thing that it has to be, as I said, is very important to them. Freedom is very important to Luke Skywalker, I think pretty much because of his value system. But it's a good idea to give characters even more personal reasons why these missions are so critical. And I think the reason why Ben tells Luke in the first movie that his father was fighting for these same things is because it makes the mission a mission that he's got to carry on for his dad to realize his father's legacy. And then we find out, spoiler alert, Darth Vader's his father in Empire Strikes Back. It complicates his connection with that mission and makes him hopefully doubt himself and gives him yet another obstacle to overcome. But the point of that relationship is to ensure that Luke Skywalker's sense of accountability for how the galaxy is enslaved and how the galaxy is liberated, that's a personal thing, okay? Every good story has that. And, even Macbeth. Macbeth wants to be king, really to make his wife happy. When you get right down to it, he loves his wife and respects her judgment. and she wants to be queen, and he's going to make that happen. So it's not just that he wants the power, it's that he wants the relationships in his life to work. And having that sort of urgency pushes the mission forward. Now, the job that the character is being given and the degree of specificity with which you look at the work that character is doing to accomplish that mission will create its own tone. Okay? So, to discuss two movies that we're producing here. First of all, Quantum Theory is the story of really two young, very plucky women, scientists both, brilliant geniuses, who are capable of almost anything, who dig a hole for themselves by accepting money without really understanding where it's coming from to develop their prototypes, and the prototype winds up in the wrong hands, okay? As a result of their own failures and the decisions they make, the prototype winds up, long story short, in the hands of a defense contractor who uses it. And the prototype is a prototype that changes reality. Literally can change reality according to your thoughts. So the defense contractor creates a world where these two girls are coming in every day and working for them and don't know that they ever developed this prototype, in their apartment as sort of a garage operation to begin with, because it never happens. It's a new world. And the girls have to figure out, right, that this is what's happened because the world's different. There's no evidence that this even took place. So they literally have to find the tiniest little scraps of information that sort of glitches in the world that suggest that something's not right, figure out what's not right and why it's not right and how it got to be that way so that they can steal their own technology back, right, and set right the things that were wrong. On the one hand, the fact that they're doing this with each other, the fact that they're relying on each other as part of their action helps define the tone of the movie. It's a much more personal and intimate and also friendly movie because it's about people relying on one another, sometimes in the wrong ways and sometimes in the right ways, to get to a greater goal and a greater vision. It's also about figuring out and getting on top of a defense contractor with all this espionage going on and all. Plenty of cause for paranoia is what I'm saying. Unlimited resources, zero ethical accountability. So they're dealing with an institution that has the ability to just squash them, and they're trying to stay out from under that boot. So there's a high degree of tension in the movie, but the way that they do it is by building relationships with people that they can rely on and finding the resources that it's going to take to get on top of this. So the fun and the ridiculousness of the movie is not a creative choice, although certainly part of the reason why we chose the actions that we did and we chose to focus on the relationships that we did was to help the movie feel more fun, because we wanted to have a good experience with people, right? It ends up being whimsical and it ends up being silly when it is whimsical and silly, which it is frequently, like any heist movie, really, because the characters are learning things together. And when you learn things with a group of people, it's pretty much always funny because you're making a fool of yourself. That's part of the process. That's one of the things that you have to do. And their willingness to do that and learning how to be willing to do that is a big part of how they end up winning in the end. So the tone of Quantum Theory is something that people will latch onto as very whimsical and quirky is the word they will use. It's quirky, right? Because it's tense and at the same time it's fun. So that's how critics will see it. That's how people will look at it. But really, the reason we're arriving at that experience with our audiences is because the actions of the characters are demanding, on the one hand, incredible resourcefulness and incredible resilience to deal with these massive problems, and at the same time, massive amounts of humility. They're having to grow as people in front of one another, and that's always going to be hilarious. It's hilarious in the way that families are hilarious, and the fact that these girls have to throw away all shame and deal with that just makes it funnier. So that's how the tone happened, through the actions of the characters. But those actions are ultimately about getting the prototype back. If they don't build these relationships, if they don't throw their humility away, if they don't use every corner of their brains, even the things that maybe sound stupid, and if they don't find a way to build trust with people that inherently don't trust people, if they don't extend themselves so far and so openly that they can reach people who don't want to be reached, they're not going to have the resources to beat the problem that's in front of them. That's all in deference to and in pursuit of the goals of the characters. And it's personal because they broke it and they have to fix it. They broke everything. Everything, if you can imagine that. The whole world is screwed up because of the decisions they made. So it's really important that they set it right, because no one else can, and because no one else should have to. That's where the tone comes from. And on the other hand, we're working on Man and Machine, which we're going to direct right after Quantum Theory, which is an ugly, mean, petty, angry movie about a computer science department, and specifically Dr. Garth Stevenson, who is getting thrown out of the department. He doesn't know it. We find out right in the first scene that the department's sort of trying to move him on out. Turns out there's personal reasons why this is happening, as well as professional reasons, but the real sort of thrust of it is that he hasn't brought any grant money in 2 years, and the department's looking for the opportunity to find someone who will, because academics works like that. And there's all these little political circles and little personal circles and little cliques and relationships that he doesn't know are happening, that are influencing things behind his back, that make it much more important to the people around him to sort of usher him on his way, either to some other university or just out of the university system and away from his life. And in desperation, he starts looking for a way to pull in some quick grant money, and decides to go back to the things that were always important to him in grad school and start pursuing some work in artificial intelligence that he toyed with during his post-grad years. And it turns out the NSA is willing to pay, and they're willing to pay a lot. And all of these relationships that have formed behind his back are all of a sudden swayed by the money, and everybody's trying to get their piece of the pie that he brings into the department. And through this process, he's trying to maintain the scientific integrity and the value and the importance of the work itself and of the research that they're doing, which is genuinely world-altering research. There's no question that what they're discovering, and the cool thing about the artificial intelligence in the movie, just for the record, is that it is a scientific process. It's not a robot that says, "Hi, I'm Al," right? No, it's something you have to perform experiments on to find out even what's happening in this machine. It's all ones and zeros, and no one knows at a glance what's happening. So you have to go in, you have to analyze the data, you have to find new ways of looking at the data, and then you have to find ways of cultivating new data that yields more. And then as you start to realize that this is a living, growing thing that has needs, you have to find a way to meet those needs so that the experiment can continue. And then the ethical questions start to come up of who's responsible? Is this something we are responsible for? And does the NSA see it the same way as Dr. Stevenson, the same way as the department chair? And everyone's got their agenda. And then something goes horribly wrong, as they often do in these things. And then people start passing the accountability and the responsibility for that. And everything starts to fall apart for Dr. Stevenson, and he's trying to figure out what's important in this situation. What does he save, and how does he save it? when you're dealing with entities that have vastly more power and influence, and you're dealing with people who've been whittling them away and taking their little pieces of everything that's going on. Everybody's trying to get their thing. And Dr. Stevenson has found himself in a position where he actually can influence the development of human civilization. And he's trying to figure out if that's his thing, and how does he protect that while everybody else is protecting what's important to them. If it sounds skeezy and nasty, it is. It's not a tonal choice. It's coming from the action. Everybody is trying to protect their own little piece of this very important thing, and the things that they're trying to protect it for are not as important as the thing itself. But as people often do in their short-sightedness, they're taking their slice of the pie anyway. And they're fighting for those slices of pie at the expense of one another, and at the expense of human progress. And how does that turn out? Well, it's intriguing. It's a fun story. But it's not quirky. You see how that works? It's the fighting and the conniving that makes it intense and that makes it sadistic. It's not the sadism that makes the fighting and the conniving. It's the other way around. So, yes, and then people will enjoy the sadism of Man and Machine. People will enjoy the Schadenfreude and the human filth of it, you know, because it's titillating to see ourselves in these characters and not be accountable for that observation. We can kind of walk away and be like, oh, not me, I wouldn't be like that, right? Maybe we can, but at the same time, it challenges us to look at our lives a little more closely and maybe make decisions a little bit differently than we do. These stories aren't bad for us. But they're also stories about the things people did and not about the tone or the candor in which they did them. That's just the easiest thing to identify, because what the characters are doing is structural. It's in the roots, and and the tone is something that you can look at in the same way that you would look at a painting. It's not about the structure for a critic. It's about the finished product and how it's presented. And what I'm saying is, you find the action of the story and then you communicate it in the most direct manner possible. And as you focus on the specifics of those actions, a tone will emerge. The cameraman is shooting what the actors are doing, and they want to communicate that as clearly as possible. And as they gain perspective on what the actors are doing, the choices they make will start to point towards the experience the audience is going to have. But it's not like a bunch of people sit around in a room and say, oh, this is dark, it has to be dark, or this is silly, it has to be silly. And when people do sit in a room and have that exact discussion, they're doing it wrong. We're missing the point. We need to step back. We need to make a more honest effort to identify the actions of the story and bring that about. So that's why I did the Rifkin blog. That's why I grind my teeth every time I read an article about how great the tone was of this movie or how inappropriate the tone was of that movie, because we're reinforcing the idea in our executives that that's something they need to be focused on, when in reality what they really need to be focused on is what the characters are doing and what the actors are doing, and how that's being communicated. And check out the Rifkin if you'd like to. You go to 8sidedforum.com, click on there's a panel full of groups on the right-hand side of the screen, David Allen Rifkin. You can get the opposite perspective to the one that I just gave you. Have a good night, folks. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.